profound stigma surrounding poor mental health and addiction make it incredibly difficult for those struggling to seek meaningful treatment. Foundational approaches often criminalize substance use and strip away patient autonomy. Offering holistic support is necessary to protecting the well-being of those suffering.
In the withdrawal stages, medical professionals can aid individuals with both prescriptions and technological interventions with medical devices to aid with detoxification. Additionally, individuals may turn to programs like Alcohol Anonymous, which have particular beliefs that may not necessarily align with everyone else's.
The harm reduction model is a set of practical strategies and ideas aimed at reducing negative consequences associated with drug use. Harm reduction provides people who use substances with a choice of how they will minimize harms through non-judgmental and non-coercive strategies in order to enhance skills and knowledge to live safer, healthier lives.
Find us on the Demystifying Medicine McMaster YouTube channel to learn more.